Let's be honest, at some point in our lives, we have to change in order to adapt to our current times. As technology evolves and becomes more advanced, the best we can do is follow it so that we can keep ourselves up to date in order to have the best lifestyle for ourselves. This doesn't just apply to people, of course, but industries have to do the same in order to survive against the competition. In the animation field during the early 2000s, new technology was the biggest appeal for audiences, as more computer animated features were being developed and dominating the box office. Pixar already made a strong first impression with Toy Story, Monsters Inc., and Finding Nemo, but then other studios started to come out with their own CG films like Shrek, Jimmy Neutron Boy Genius, and Ice Age, all of which came out as winners both critically and financially. Meanwhile, as Disney decided to be more adventurous, so to speak, with their animated features instead of their usual musicals, audiences started to lose interest in what they had to offer, even to the point where their films were losing a significant amount of money, including a $74 million loss on Treasure Planet alone. They had times when they brought out something successful, like Lilo and Stitch, but those times were very rare, and usually they end up getting easily overshadowed by the latest CG hit or by other major competitors. This was a wake-up call for Disney that they were no longer at the top of the industry and must adapt if they hope to stay in the competition. As difficult of a decision it must have been, they had to sacrifice traditional hand-drawn animation in favor of producing their own computer-animated features. And if it wasn't Atlantis or Treasure Planet that convinced them to do so, then the only movie that could to abandon hand-drawn was Home on the Range. Set in the humble dairy farm called Patch of Heaven, a new cow joins the family called Maggie, a former show cow coming in making a first big impression with an even bigger personality. But the patch found itself in danger when the farmer Pearl only has 3 days to pay the bank, or else they're going to take her farm away and sell it to the highest bidder. So after discovering that there is a cattle rustler named Alameda Slim with a bounty that is worth exactly the same amount as what Pearl owes the bank, it is up to Maggie and 2 other cows from the farm, Miss Calloway and Grace, to stop Slim from committing his cow crimes and capture him to take the bounty and save the farm. Straight after Pocahontas, director Mike Gabriel proposed an idea to the executives of a Western-style movie called Sweating Bullets. In his original plan, it was like a Western version of Captain Courageous, where a timid cowboy enters a ghost town and confronts the spirit of an evil cattle rustler. Even with a simple concept like that, it was enough to impress then feature animation president Peter Schneider, and the project headed immediately into production, where he went back in the director's chair with Mike Giamo as his co-director. Over the years, however, the story had to go through numerous of changes, especially regarding the lead who went from a kid to a little bull named Bullets who wants to be more like a horse to 3 cows on a bounty hunting mission to save their farm. The only element that remained in the final cut since the very beginning is the villainous cattle rustler Slim, or more specifically, Alameda Slim. During that time, they were preparing themselves to immerse into the Western world, including doing a cattle drive in Wyoming for research and providing concept art that was more of an homage to some of the Disney cartoons of the 1940s and 1950s that would emphasize more the shapes and the colors of the characters and backgrounds. But then in 2000, the story was proven to be a little more problematic than they expected, and the only solution they had at that point was to change leadership, resulting in Gabriel and Giamo to leave the project. Shortly after, their jobs were filled by The Road to El Dorado director Will Finn, who was supposed to be the supervising animator of Maggie, and John Sanford. After finishing his work on Hercules, Alan Menken signed on to the project to compose the music, and have Glenn Slater to write the lyrics for the songs, who was brought in during the time that he was getting some prestigious awards like the Kleban Award for Lyrics and the ASCAP Richard Rogers New Horizons Award. Since then, they managed to create 6 new songs for the feature, with the first being Little Patch of Heaven written back in 1999. But of course, after the big switch of the story and the directors, they also had to change up the songs to fit the new narrative, including putting in Will the Sun Ever Shine Again that was written as a response to the attacks on September 11th, 2001. Initially, Maggie was meant to be an original member of the farm, no different from Miss Calloway and Grace. But that was making the plot a bit tedious at times, so the executives miraculously let them update the character to become an outsider that is the newest member of Patch of Heaven. I say miraculously because they let them do the change when they were only 1 year left in production, and they already had the first act almost fully animated. In fact, a keen eye could spot some scenes at the start of the film where Maggie was supposed to be before they turned her into a newcomer. While it was set to be released in 2003, Disney decided to switch its release with Brother Bear, where it moved to April 2nd, 2004, mainly because, as I said before, the bears were a better fit to promote on the Platinum Edition of The Lion King DVD. And when The Herd headed its way to theaters, it was not good. In fact, almost nothing went right for the three cows. While they didn't think it was the worst animated film out there, the critics thought that the movie was just weak. They believed maybe kids would enjoy it and the songs were nice, but everything else like the story and especially the comedy was some of Disney's worst. And speaking of Disney's worst, it was also one of their worst box office bombs by only making $50 million domestically and a worldwide total of $145.4 million. And considering that this was a pretty expensive feature to make with a budget of $110 million, it was guaranteed that the company had to make a write-off that was said to be up to $70 million. The only time Home on the Range ever appeared after it came out in theaters was a 3-minute animated short released on the movie's DVD called A Dairy Tale, where Miss Calloway and the other animals on the farm tell the story of the three little pigs. Since then, the movie gained a reputation of being among the worst of Disney animation, mainly due to its quality being considered subpar compared to the other features the studio made over the years. In a way, it met a very unfortunate fate. It had the chance to stand out as a very rare breed of animated film that can be found in the Western genre, and regardless of what you may think of the picture, there was some heart put into it, like from the animators who brought these characters and scenes to life, and from Menken and Slater when making the songs. People may not be too wild about this Disney Western, but for the team that made it, it was a little moment they wouldn't forget in that little patch of heaven. Like I said before, Disney had to eventually adapt to the new standards in the animation industry by producing their own computer animated features. They've had plenty of experience with CGI before to enhance their effects, backgrounds, and even putting it in the forefront by making CG dinosaurs and place them in live-action environments, but it was time that they made an animated film that is 100% pure computer graphics with Chicken Little. It's about the title character Chicken Little, an outcast hated by his town by making everyone panic for nothing because he believed that the sky was falling. But suddenly, one night after regaining his reputation by winning a baseball game, his worst fear finally happened when a piece of the sky did fall and crashed in his house. So with the help of his friends, Abby Millard, Runt of the Litter, and Fish Out of Water, they seek out to solve the mystery of this piece of sky and make an out-of-this-world discovery that will lead the kids to try to save their town. Back in 2001, The Emperor's New Groove director, Mark Dindal, had an idea to make a movie version of the classic folktale of the same name. While this wasn't the company's first time to tell the tale, since they did so by turning it into a World War II propaganda cartoon back in 1943, Dindal's version was completely different. His original idea was about a little girl who wanted to go to summer camp to ease her overreactions and save her relationship with her father, but later has to stop her evil camp counselor, planned to be voiced by Penn Jillette, in order to save her hometown. When proposed to Michael Eisner, he liked the idea, but it just needed one little change. Instead of a girl, Eisner wanted Chicken Little to be a boy because he argued that you're most likely to get picked on for being short if you're a boy. However, in early 2003, when David Staten came in as the new feature animation president, he wanted an even bigger change by redoing the whole story altogether. As a result, Dindal and several writers and crew members all spent about 2.5 years to create a brand new plotline with new characters and more focus on the emotional aspects like the father-son relationship that included one new integral component: aliens. More specifically, the plot is now about Chicken Little trying to save his town from an alien invasion. Speaking of the chicken himself, he went through a whole list of celebrities to find the right voice that would convincingly sound like a teenager. When he was a girl, the directors thought about having Holly Hunter to be the voice. But after the sex change, they considered maybe Matthew Broderick, Michael J. Fox, or have Mark work with David Spade again. But ultimately, Zach Braff was proven to be the right choice. The same thing also happened to Abby, where Sean Hayes was considered when she was originally a boy. But then, after becoming a girl, they threw around many other potential voices like Jamie Lee Curtis, Jodie Foster, Gina Davis, Sarah Jessica Parker, Madonna, or still bring in Holly Hunter but to be Abby instead. But at the end, the role was given to Joan Cusack. For their first full attempt to produce computer animation in an entire feature film, they aimed to capture a cartoony style that is more reminiscent to the Disney cartoons like Goofy's from the 1940s and 1950s, where it features a good balance of fluidity and comedic slapstick with a strong use of squash and stretch. However, the CGI team they had was too small to work on a whole feature on their own. That's why half of the new team consisted of their 2D animators who had to take an 18-month crash course on animating with CG and using the software Maya. In a way, a good amount of the team had to relearn how to animate with these new tools and develop some new software in order to achieve the look that they were going for. Some of that software included the appropriately named Chicken Wire, which can manipulate the shape of the characters to get the right poses and facial expressions, Shelf Control, a program in Maya that helped the animators to have easier control of the CG models, Lumiere to give the lighting a boost and help refine the shadows, and a new software they made called XGen to create the textures for the animals, their clothes, and on nature like the leaves and grass. Originally set for a release of July 1st, 2005, Disney had to delay the movie by a few months to November 4th. The reason was because the movie that was meant to be released at that time, Pixar's Cars, had to be pushed back to June 9th, 2006 because analysts speculated that the animation studio there was bracing themselves for the uncertain future of their collaboration with Disney. More on that a little later. But back onto Chicken Little, on its release, it was the first movie to also come out in Disney Digital 3D, presented in around 84 enhanced theaters, which also makes this the first feature film in history to be presented in Digital 3D. And when Chicken Little showed up on the big screen, the movie turned out to be just like its title character during the opening. A complete embarrassment.
A movie. A movie. They're making a movie. When will everybody forget your big mistake?
The critics did not hold back on their distaste for this movie. Some might have seen some of the appeal and the effort put into the feature, like with its animation and voice acting, but the rest, like the unorganized story, stale humor, the dysfunctional emotional core, and its attempts to be like other animated films at the time by implementing pop culture references and pop songs, resulted in the feature to feel unpleasantly weak. However, when Chicken Little looks at how he did financially, all he could do is just look at those reviews and say,
"Who are we talking about?"
Despite receiving some of Disney Animation's worst reviews, it was also their biggest hit since Lilo and Stitch, making an impressive $135.4 million domestically and $314 million worldwide. It was also proven to be a home run on home media as well, where the movie sold 2.7 million DVD copies and grossed $142.6 million, with $48 million earned on its first week alone. It even managed to get some recognition at the Annie Awards by earning 4 nominations, but all those trophies went to Wallace and Gromit: The Curse of the Were-Rabbit. Much like Home on the Range, it has gained a reputation of being the runt of Disney Animation's litter, with many fans deeming it as among their worst. But unlike Home on the Range, It was the financial success they needed to justify that they were still in the animation competition and that they too could provide some computer animated hits, which later on even helped Disney in more ways than just financially. In a time when Disney felt like the sky was falling for their animation division, it only took a little chicken to give Disney their biggest animated win in years. Definitely not a critical win, but still a win by making money fall from the sky. No. Soon after the release of Chicken Little, the animation studio went through some significant changes that would completely reshape Disney animation. In fact, it would mark as a new chapter to help them recover after the set of box office bombs they've endured. However, this didn't just happen because of one quick executive decision, but rather, it's the result of one of the biggest shakeups in the history of the Walt Disney Company. Going back to the end of 2003, just after the release of Brother Bear, Roy E. Disney announced that he resigned from the company, and that he and Stanley Gold are reviving the Save Disney campaign to kick out Michael Eisner, the same campaign that got rid of Ron Miller back in 1984. Roy argued that Eisner was spiraling out of control and is consequentially destroying the company from within. Sure, he had a few wins during the early 2000s, like with Who Wants to Be a Millionaire and Pirates of the Caribbean: The Curse of the Black Pearl, but everything else he did in almost every division was just a complete disaster. ABC was on the brink of collapsing in itself, the theme parks became a joke after the embarrassing opening of Disney's California Adventure and the never-ending failures of Disneyland Paris, and his mismanagement has caused the company to turn into a rapacious and soulless conglomerate. But possibly his worst offense for Roy was his poor handling of the animation division. As you could tell, their feature animation studio was bringing out more failures than successes, and were consequentially losing a significant amount of money for the company. By 2004, after Brother Bear and Home on the Range, Disney decided to let go of hand-drawn animation due to the evolving landscape of the animation industry at the time, and convert their studio to only produce computer animated films, taking their old traditional equipment and selling them away. Even just before that announcement, they also decided to drop their Florida studio, since they were in the process of shutting down their overseas studios like the one in France to have their Burbank studio be their only studio. As for their relationship with Pixar during that same year, a clash between Eisner and then Pixar CEO Steve Jobs resulted in the acclaimed animation house to not renew their deal and look elsewhere for distribution once their contract was over after the release of Cars. Disney, in response, opened up a new animation studio called Circle 7 Animation, which would have specialized in making sequels to the Pixar films like Toy Story, Monsters Inc., and Finding Nemo. Under Eisner, it was becoming clear that he was bringing the company towards a downward spiral with relationships broken, earnings disappearing, and the brand name tarnished. But then, a year later, Roy's Save Disney campaign finally paid off. On March 13, 2005, after shareholders openly expressing their discontent with the CEO, Michael Eisner announced that he would resign on September 30th of that year. While Roy and Gold finished their campaign and returned to the company's board, Michael already had in mind one person to take his place. The former president of ABC that became Eisner's second-in-command and the president and chief operating officer at Disney, Robert Iger. When stepping in as the new CEO, one of the first things Bob noticed was how much of a mess the animation division had become, and knew that one of his first major operations was bringing Pixar back to the Disney family. And so, on January 24th, 2006, after long negotiations with Steve Jobs and thanks to the help of the financial success of Chicken Little, not only did Pixar return to Disney, but the company completely bought the studio for $7.4 billion, even closing down the short-lived Circle 7 as a symbol of their trust rekindled. As for Disney feature animation, Bob's solution was to get new leadership for the studio in the hopes that it would give it a boost. Since Pixar already had some renown and strong heads, Iger decided to have them lead both Pixar and Disney Animation in their respective roles. There was Ed Catmull as the president, and John Lasseter as the chief creative officer. Together, they were determined to put Disney Animation back on its feet with the same attention and care that they were giving to Pixar, giving more creative control to the filmmakers instead of the executives, bringing back some of the big-name animators of the Disney Renaissance, creating a brain trust similar to Pixar's for the top creative heads to help with the development of their films, and rebooting morale at the studio along the way. It was almost like Ed and John made an entirely new studio at Disney. In fact, shortly afterwards, Lasseter renamed the place to mark the occasion from Walt Disney Feature Animation to Walt Disney Animation Studios. Lasseter also updated Disney Toon Studios to stop producing direct-to-video animated sequels and focus on creating more original content, resulting in the sequels of Pinocchio, The Aristocats, and Chicken Little to be cancelled. The ones that were far ahead in production, like Cinderella 3: A Twist in Time and The Little Mermaid: Ariel's Beginning, were the final sequels the studio released. Oh, and by the way, when I said that they would focus more on producing original content, I mean that they would literally just make spin-offs of Disney's existing properties like the Tinkerbell movies and the Planes films. Well, at least they're not sequels, I guess. But while all the changes were happening, the studio was still at work on another computer animated film, one that would initiate Disney Animation's new beginning and their new motivation to keep moving forward: Meet the Robinsons. It's about Louis, an orphan who invented a memory scanner for the sake of seeing who his birth mother was and to know the reason why she left him at the orphanage. At the science fair, it turned out to be a complete failure, but it was actually sabotaged by a mysterious bowler hat guy. Soon afterwards, another kid named Wilbur appears in need of Louis's help, since he and the bowler hat guy are actually from the future, and the guy is time traveling in order to take down Louis. So after agreeing to go to the future with him, Louis has to stick around with Wilbur's eccentric family, the Robinsons, in the meantime, while also uncovering the truth about the family and the bowler hat guy. The project all began when Disney bought the film rights to the book A Day with Wilbur Robinson by William Joyce, which he wrote it as a fictionalized biography that features over-the-top versions of Joyce's family members he grew up with. They planned this to be a live-action feature, but by 2004, the project ultimately got in the hands of the animation studio. As for the director, story supervisor and animator Steven Anderson knew that this movie had to be his directorial debut, since he felt a strong connection with Louis as they were both adopted and both learned about moving forward with the family they have now instead of searching in the past to know who their birth parents were. Steven also took on the additional task of voicing the bowler hat guy.
Pass off invention as my own. Check. Oh, I love checklists.
When the project transitioned to animation, the new team didn't just get to it and start making a movie. They had to prove their worth that they could do it. So in a risky and experimental move, the crew not only had to write the script, but also storyboard the entire movie and present it to the executives to determine if the movie should be greenlit. Obviously, it did get approved, but that didn't mean that the movie they had would remain. Once Catmull and Lasseter became in charge of Disney Animation, John had an issue with the bowler hat guy where he found that, while funny, he wasn't really threatening as a villain. As a result, the team took 10 months to change more than half of the entire feature, including giving the film a new ending, adding a T-Rex to go after Louis, and, most importantly, give the guy an evil robot henchman that's also his bowler hat named Doris. Originally, the animation style was supposed to stay true to Joyce's illustrations in the book. However, Blue Sky Studios beat Disney to the punch in 2005 when they released Robots, where the author worked as a producer and production designer. And considering that the Robinsons have a Joyce-style robot of their own with Carl, it would not be a good look if Disney seemed like they were copying from another animation house. As a result, the animators could only take a bit of inspiration from his style, keeping that retro Technicolor theme, but also look elsewhere for their sources, including the Disney classics like Alice in Wonderland and Steve Jobs' other company, Apple. One major challenge for Disney with this film is that this is their first fully computer animated film that features humans, which requires a completely different set of animation skills than what they had for Chicken Little and Dinosaur. To help know how to get through it, they looked for inspiration with another animated feature and how they went through the task of making their first CG movie that mainly features humans, and that was Pixar's 2004 film, The Incredibles. When the movie was released on March 23, 2007, it also came out in digital 3D, which that version also featured the 1953 Donald Duck and Chip 'n Dale short that was already made in 3D, Working for Peanuts. Between the original release and The Robinsons, the short was also presented at Disneyland and at Walt Disney World when accompanied with another 3D film, Magic Journeys. But back on to Meet the Robinsons, Lewis and Wilbur's time-traveling tale turned out to be okay, I guess? Its release wasn't great, but I suppose they didn't count this as one of their big failures of the decade. Financially, it did decently well with a domestic gross of $97.8 million and a worldwide total of $169.3 million. Then again, it's rumored to have a seriously huge budget, so maybe the numbers are not a good thing. As for the reviews it got, they generally went alright with the critics. Some had a blast with it, others teared it to shreds, but usually they stated that they liked it enough to give it a pass. There was supposed to be a direct-to-video sequel to the film called Meet the Robinsons 2 First Date that was in the works even before the original came out, but after Lasseter stepped in and demanded that big update for Disney Toon Studios, the project was scrapped along with the other rejected sequels. For Disney, this is a movie that exists. It did its job when it came out in theaters, but far from enough to make an impact like their classics, which is why they barely acknowledge its existence nowadays. But symbolically, this was the movie that represented Disney's new ideology. They stopped looking at the past to solve their problems and focus on moving ahead to explore new opportunities and endless possibilities. In the movie, they keep repeating the phrase, that was taken from a quote from Walt Disney himself, which is highlighted before the credits when it states,
"Around here, however, we don't look backwards for very long. We keep moving forward, opening up new doors and doing new things, because we're curious, and curiosity keeps leading us down new paths."
While the result did not turn out to be as stellar as the other Disney pictures, at least Meet the Robinsons production did go smoothly, even during one of Disney's biggest transitions. The same, however, cannot be said for the next film, as it went through a more hectic time making it, along with some creative clashes. But in the end, they still managed to deliver a movie with Bolt. It's the story of a dog named Bolt, who has an arsenal of superpowers that he uses to help his owner Penny take down the evil Dr. Calico. However, that is not the plot of this movie. That's what happens in the TV show that Bolt stars in. And yet, he doesn't even know that. He actually believes that literally everything that happens around him is real. When they made an episode where it ends with Penny getting kidnapped, Bolt runs off and accidentally ships himself from the studios of Hollywood to the streets of New York City. So once reality hits him that his powers are, television exclusive, you could say, Bolt teams up with a sarcastic cat named Mittens and a hamster named Rhino that's also his biggest fan to travel across the country to go back to Hollywood and discover that who he is in the show may not actually be inaccurate. Before Bolt would call himself Bolt and being taken care of by a couple of new directors, he was just a simple American dog. In fact, the project began as a movie called American Dog that was written and directed by Lilo & Stitch creator Chris Sanders. In his original version, it was about a dog who has his own TV show named Henry, and regardless if he's on or off camera, he believes that everything that happens around him is real. But one day, he finds himself in the Nevada desert, and now has to team up with a one-eyed cat and a large radioactive bunny to find his way home. The production was going pretty well, but then came the new leads at Disney, and they had a few more words to give towards Sanders' film than they did for Meet the Robinsons. After a couple of screenings, John Lasseter and several other directors from both Disney and Pixar gave Chris a few notes in order to improve the feature. According to John, Sanders did not take the criticisms well, resulting him to clash with his critics in order to keep his ideas intact. Ultimately, when it was clear the movie would not go his way, Chris quit the studio and moved on to work at DreamWorks Animation. In his place, Lasseter put in two Disney veterans to make their directorial debut, writer Chris Williams and animator Byron Howard. Together, while still keeping the same concept, they made several alterations to improve the story, including making the starting point of the dog's journey from Nevada to New York, have the one-eyed cat become a snarky alley cat, change the bunny into a hamster in a ball, voiced by story artist Mark Walton, and turn Henry into an American White Shepherd named Bolt. The reason for that choice of breed was because their long ears that generally point up make it easier for the animators to play around with so that the character can be more expressive. However, while the duo was set to make their movie, there was one major catch that would intensify the production. They only had 18 months to produce the feature, so they had to act quickly. On a side note, this was the last film to feature inside the actor's studio host James Lipton, who played the voice of the director. But even with that limited time, that wouldn't stop them from being more experimental with their animation. To bring some of the Disney traditions to CG, art director Paul Felix got the idea of giving the environments a more painterly look, as if the 3D characters are in front of a handmade painted background. It took them several tests to get the look right, and the team developed a new software that is similar to Deep Canvas where they could add brushstrokes to 3D models like on the buildings, resulting in a style that they were quite satisfied with where the areas around Bolt are reminiscent to the works of American painters, rather it be to present the large busy streets of New York or the natural areas of Ohio. They also developed a software to animate the leash that kept Bolt and Mittens together, which proved to be quite a challenge for the animators. When Bolt began his journey to the big screen on November 21st, 2008, it had been years since Disney made quite an impactful bark like this, receiving some of their best reviews in a long time where critics felt like even with a not-so-original story, it more than makes up for it with its great animation, strong characters, and memorable moments of action, comedy, and heart. Also, later on, Bolt helped Disney Animation to prominently return as a competitor during awards season, where it received several nominations like an Oscar, a Golden Globe, an Annie, 3 Visual Effects Society awards, and more, mainly for Best Animated Feature and an extra Golden Globe nomination for Best Original Song with I Thought I Lost You. But the movie didn't win any of them, losing mostly to Pixar's Wall-E. At the box office, while it had some tough competition like Twilight and Quantum of Solace, it did do well for itself, earning $114.1 million domestically and $310 million worldwide. The movie also had a major financial boost from home media sales, which also included the exclusive spin-off short Super Rhino, where in 2009, Bolt managed to sell more than 4.6 million copies. With the reception the movie received, was Bolt the moment that Disney Animation finally made a comeback? Not really. Bolt did perform well when it was in theaters, but it did not make the same cultural impact as the more notable Disney features. However, the movie is often noted to be the step in the right direction for what was to come. Under the new leadership at both the company and the animation studio, Disney was all set to rebuild their animation division to become bigger and better, armed with new technology to tell stories that only they know how to do them best with their traditional formula, and bringing audiences to worlds they've never seen before to meet unforgettable characters they've yet to meet. Did Bolt start a new age of Disney animation? No, but they were almost there.
Don't you worry, Daddy. We'll be there soon.